The cheering reached Theron before he saw her face. He pulled his horse to a halt at the crest of the hill, frowning at the village square below. A crowd had gathered near the old stone well, perhaps 30 people or more, their voices rising in a sound he hadn't heard from his tenants in months. Laughter. Genuine, unguarded laughter. And at the center of it all stood a woman in a simple blue dress, her dark hair escaping its pins. A child balanced on her hip, while 2 others tugged at her skirts. Theron's blood turned to ice. He knew that dress. He'd paid for it, along with everything else she owned. He knew that hair, too, though he'd only seen it properly arranged twice. Once at their wedding, once at his father's funeral 3 days later. His wife, his hidden, forgotten, deliberately invisible wife, was standing in the middle of Renford Village, like she belonged there. Your Grace. His steward, Mr. Caius, rode up beside him, slightly breathless. I wasn't expecting you to take the eastern route. If I'd known, I would've. What is she doing? The words came out colder than Theron intended. Caius followed his gaze and had the grace to look uncomfortable. Ah, the Duchess. She's been... That is to say, she occasionally... Occasionally what? Visits, Your Grace. The tenants. She brings food to the Hartley family. Mrs. Hartley has been ill since the birth of her 4th. And she reads to old Mr. Pemberton, whose eyes have failed. And she organized the women to repair the schoolhouse roof after the storm last month. The men provided the labor, but she... Caius stopped himself, seeming to realize he was digging a deeper hole with every word. It's been happening for some time, Your Grace. Some time. Theron had kept Corisanda confined to the East Wing for 6 months. He'd given explicit instructions that she was to want for nothing, but also to be kept separate from the household's daily operations. He'd told himself it was for her own protection. Her family's scandal still clung to her name like smoke, and society had long memories. Better to wait until the gossip died before presenting her publicly. Better, truthfully, to pretend the marriage had never happened at all. And yet, here she was, surrounded by his people, holding their children, and their smiles, while he sat on his horse like a stranger surveying foreign territory. The crowd parted as an elderly woman approached Corisanda, pressing something into her hands. Even from this distance, Theron could see his wife's face soften, could see her lean down to embrace the old woman with an ease that spoke of genuine affection. Who was this person? This wasn't the pale, silent girl who'd stood beside him at the altar, trembling so badly he'd feared she might collapse. This wasn't the ghost who drifted through the East Wing, never venturing beyond her assigned rooms, never making a sound he could hear. How long? Theron asked quietly. Your Grace? How long has she been doing this, Caius? And do not soften your answer. I want the truth. The steward hesitated. Since the 2nd week of her arrival, Your Grace. She asked Mrs. Fenwick about the tenants. Who was struggling? Who needed help? The housekeeper assumed... We all assumed you knew. 6 months. For 6 months, his wife had been living an entirely separate life under his very roof, building connections with his people that he himself had neglected since his father's death. And no one had thought to mention it. Or perhaps they had, and he simply hadn't listened. The child on Corisanda's hip, a girl of perhaps 2 years, reached up and patted her cheek. Corisanda laughed, and the sound carried across the distance like something sharp aimed directly at Theron's chest. He'd never heard her laugh. In 6 months of marriage, he had never once heard his wife laugh. She sees you, Caius said softly. Theron looked down to find Corisanda's gaze fixed on him. The laughter died on her lips. The color drained from her face. She passed the child quickly to a nearby woman and stepped back, her hands twisting in her skirts. Afraid. She was afraid of him. The realization should have satisfied something in him. Proof that she understood her place, understood the boundaries he'd established. Instead, it sat in his stomach like rotten fruit. The crowd had noticed him now, too. The cheering stopped. Hats were removed. Curtsies and bows rippled through the villagers like a wave. But their eyes kept darting between the Duke on the hill and the Duchess in their midst, curiosity and confusion written plainly on their faces. They didn't know, Theron realized. They didn't know she was supposed to be invisible. To them, she was simply the Duchess of Renford, doing what a duchess should do, caring for her people, while her husband sat on a horse and watched her like an enemy. "Your Grace," Caius ventured carefully, "shall I escort the Duchess back to the hall?" "No." Theron urged his horse forward, descending the hill toward the village. The crowd parted further, creating a path directly to where Coruscant stood frozen by the well. He dismounted with practiced ease and handed his reins to a boy who materialized at his elbow. His wife watched him approach, the way a rabbit watches a hawk. He stopped 3 feet from her. Up close, he could see the evidence of her morning's work, a smudge of flour on her sleeve, a grass stain on her hem, a faint sheen of perspiration at her temples. She looked nothing like a duchess. She looked real. "Your Grace," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She curtsied deeply, her eyes fixed on the ground. "I apologize. I didn't expect. I wasn't aware you would be." "Clearly." The word hung between them, sharp as a blade. Around them, the villagers had gone utterly silent. Theron could feel their stares, their judgment, and their protective concern for the woman who had apparently won their hearts while he wasn't looking. "We should speak," he said. "Privately." Coruscant's face grew paler still, but she nodded. "Of course, Your Grace." He turned toward his horse, then stopped. The old woman who had embraced Coruscant moments before was watching him with eyes that held no deference whatsoever. She looked at him the way his old nursemaid used to, measuring, unimpressed, thoroughly unafraid. "She's a good one," the old woman said loudly. "Your lady wife. You do well to keep her close, Your Grace. We don't get many like her." The implication was clear. They got plenty like him. Theron said nothing, but as he mounted his horse and waited for Coruscant to be helped onto her own mare, a mare he hadn't known she could ride, he found himself wondering exactly when he had become the villain in his own household, and what precisely he was going to do about the wife he had tried so hard to forget. The ride back to Renford Hall stretched into an eternity of silence. Coruscant kept her mare 2 lengths behind her husband's stallion, watching the rigid line of his back and trying to calculate exactly how much trouble she had created for herself. 6 months of careful invisibility, undone in a single morning. She should have been more careful. She should have checked the roads before venturing into the village. She should have remembered that the Duke occasionally surveyed his lands, even if he never seemed to survey his wife. But the Hartley baby had been feverish, and Mrs. Pemberton needed the medicines Coruscant had promised, and the repairs to the schoolhouse required final inspection before the children could return. There was always something. There was always someone who needed help. And the truth, the shameful truth she could barely admit to herself, was that she needed to be needed. In the cavernous loneliness of the East Wing, with its beautiful rooms and empty days, the village had become her lifeline. Those people, with their rough hands and warm hearts, had given her a purpose when her husband had given her nothing but elegant abandonment. Now that purpose was about to be stripped away. The hall rose before them, all gray stone and glittering windows, magnificent and cold. Theron dismounted at the front entrance rather than the stables, a clear signal that whatever conversation awaited would be formal. Official. Damning. A footman helped Coruscant down from her mare. Her legs trembled slightly as she followed her husband up the sweeping front steps and into the marble entrance hall. Mrs. Fenwick was waiting just inside, her face carefully neutral, The housekeeper had been Corisanda's first ally in this house, the one who had answered her questions about the tenants, who had looked the other way when she slipped out through the servants' entrance, who had kept her secrets when keeping them mattered. Now those secrets were ash. "My study," Theron said, not looking at either woman. "Have tea sent?" "Yes, Your Grace." Corisande followed her husband down the east corridor, past portraits of Ashford ancestors, who seemed to watch her with disapproval. She had studied those portraits during her first weeks here, desperate to understand the family she had married into. Generals and statesmen, society beauties and political wives. Not a single scandal among them. Until her. The study was exactly as she'd imagined it. Dark wood, leather chairs, shelves of books she would never be invited to borrow. Theron moved behind his desk, putting the massive piece of furniture between them like a barricade. "Sit," he said. Corisande sat in the chair across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She watched him pour brandy from a crystal decanter, noted that he did not offer her any, and waited for the axe to fall. 6 months, Theron said finally, swirling the brandy in his glass. "You've been leaving the East Wing for 6 months. Yes, Your Grace. Despite my explicit instructions that you were to remain, you never explicitly instructed me to remain anywhere." The words escaped before Corisande could stop them. She saw his eyes narrow and forced herself to continue, her voice steadier than she felt. "You assigned me rooms. You said I should want for nothing. You never once said I was forbidden to leave them." The implication was clear. "Implications are not instructions, Your Grace." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or grudging acknowledgement. He set down his glass with a precise click. "You've made me look a fool," he said. "My tenants adore a woman they should barely know exists. My servants have been keeping secrets from me. My own steward assumed I approved of your activities when I had no idea they were occurring. With respect, Your Grace, you made yourself look a fool." Corisande heard the words leave her mouth and felt her heart stop. This was not how invisible wives spoke to their husbands. This was not survival. But 6 months of silence had built something inside her, a pressure that demanded release. "You married me," she continued, her voice shaking now. "You brought me to this house. You gave me everything except acknowledgement, except purpose, except the smallest indication that I was anything more than an inconvenient obligation. So yes, I left my rooms. I found people who needed help. I made myself useful because the alternative was going mad in a gilded cage. And if that makes you look foolish, perhaps you should ask yourself who built the cage in the first place." Silence fell, heavy and absolute. Theron stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Which, Corisande realized bitterly, he probably was. "You're angry," he said slowly. "I'm tired." The fight drained out of her as quickly as it had come. "I'm tired of being a ghost in my own marriage. I'm tired of wondering what I did to deserve this exile. I'm tired of—" A knock at the door interrupted her. Mrs. Fenwick entered with the tea service, her eyes darting between them with barely concealed concern. "Thank you," Theron said, dismissing her. "That will be all." The housekeeper withdrew. The tea sat untouched between them, steaming gently. "My father arranged this marriage," Theron said quietly. "On his deathbed. He called it honoring an old debt. Your father saved his life once, decades ago. He said the Vance family deserved protection, even after your father's difficulties. Difficulties. Such a polite word for utter destruction. Corisande's father had gambled away 3 generations of wealth in a single disastrous year, then compounded the shame by fleeing to the continent with his mistress, leaving his wife and daughter to face the creditors alone. "I didn't ask for this marriage," Corisande said. "I didn't want it. But I had no choice. My mother was dying. The debts were. There was nothing left. When your father's solicitor appeared with the offer, it was either accept or watch my mother perish in a debtor's prison. And so you came here. And so I came here." She met his eyes steadily. "To a husband who wouldn't look at me. To a household that didn't know what to do with me. To a life that felt like a very comfortable death. So I chose differently. I chose to matter to someone, even if that someone was never going to be you." The clock on the mantel ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Theron turned away, moving to the window that overlooked the formal gardens. His profile was sharp against the afternoon light, unreadable and remote. "The Sinclair ball is in 3 weeks," he said. "My aunt expects me to attend, to present a unified front for the family. She's been asking about you." Corisand's breath caught. Lady Isadora Ashford, the Duke's formidable aunt, who ruled Renford Hall's social calendar with an iron fist, had never once acknowledged Corisanda's existence. If she was asking questions now, what did you tell her? That you were unwell? That the adjustment to married life had been difficult? He turned back to face her, his expression unreadable. She didn't believe me. She rarely does. And now? Theron was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice held something she couldn't quite identify. Resignation, perhaps, or the beginning of something else entirely. "Now I suppose we must decide what to do with you, Duchess, because after today, invisibility is no longer an option." The summons came at dawn. Corisanda had barely slept, replaying her confrontation with Theron until the words blurred together in an exhausted loop. She'd expected immediate consequences, dismissal to a country cottage, perhaps, or exile to her mother's cramped London lodgings. Instead, she'd been returned to her rooms with instructions to rest and await further discussion. Now a crisp knock announced Brinley, her young maid, whose freckled face held an expression of barely contained anxiety. "Her ladyship requests your presence in the morning room, your grace, immediately." Her ladyship, Lady Isadora Ashford, the woman who had looked through Corisand at the funeral, as if she were made of glass. "Did she say why?" "No, your grace." "But—" Brinley hesitated, then lowered her voice. "She knows. About the village. One of the footmen told his sweetheart, who works in the kitchens at the lower house. Word spreads fast in great households." "Of course it did." Corisanda rose from her dressing table, examining her reflection with a critical eye. She looked exhausted, shadows beneath her eyes, her hair hastily pinned, her dress a simple morning gown of dove gray. Hardly the image of a duchess prepared to face interrogation. But perhaps that was fitting. She hadn't been a proper duchess since the day she'd arrived. The morning room was flooded with pale sunlight when Corisand entered. Lady Isadora sat by the window, her silver hair immaculately arranged, her black mourning dress perfectly pressed. Even seated, she radiated the kind of authority that made generals hesitate. "Close the door," Lady Isadora said without preamble. "Sit there, where I can see you properly." Corisand obeyed, choosing the straight-backed chair directly across from the older woman. No point hiding. The time for hiding was clearly past. For a long moment, Lady Isadora simply studied her. Those sharp blue eyes, so like her nephew's, cataloging every detail of Corisanda's appearance with surgical precision. "So," she said finally, "the ghost has a pulse after all." "Your ladyship, don't." Lady Isadora held up one imperious hand. "Don't apologize. Don't explain. Don't give me the pretty speeches you've no doubt been rehearsing since yesterday. I've been listening to pretty speeches for 63 years. I'm thoroughly immune." Corisand closed her mouth. Better. Lady Isadora leaned back in her chair, her gaze still fixed on Corisanda's face. "My nephew tells me you've been busy these past months, visiting tenants, nursing the sick, organizing roof repairs, playing Lady Bountiful while pretending to be invisible." "I wasn't pretending to be." "You were. Don't insult my intelligence." The older woman's voice cracked like a whip. Theron put you in that wing because he wanted to forget you existed. You could have raged against it. You could have demanded your rights as his wife. Instead, you slipped out through servants' corridors and made yourself indispensable to everyone except the one person who should have mattered. Coruscant felt heat rise to her cheeks. He made it clear I didn't matter to him. And so you decided to matter elsewhere. Lady Isadora's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been respect entering her eyes. Clever, actually. Foolish, but clever. You've built yourself an army without him even noticing. I wasn't building an army. I was trying to survive. Same thing, in great houses. Lady Isadora rose, moving to a side table where tea service waited. She poured 2 cups with practiced efficiency, handing one to Coruscant without asking if she wanted it. My brother, Theron's father, wrote to me before he died. Did you know that? Coruscant shook her head. He told me about the marriage he'd arranged, explained his reasoning, the old debt to your father, the desire to see the Vance name protected despite the scandal. He asked me to watch over you. Lady Isadora's lips thinned. I ignored his request. When you arrived looking like a frightened mouse, I assumed you were exactly what you appeared, a burden foisted upon my nephew at his most vulnerable moment. And now? Now I think perhaps my brother saw something I missed. Lady Isadora returned to her seat, her teacup balanced perfectly in her hands. Mrs. Fenwick speaks highly of you. So does Caius. The tenants in the village apparently consider you some sort of guardian spirit. Even the kitchen maids sing your praises. She paused. That's rather impressive for a ghost. Coruscant didn't know how to respond. She'd expected accusations, condemnation, perhaps even threats. Not this measured assessment. My nephew is grieving, Lady Isadora continued. Badly. He lost his father, then found himself saddled with a wife he never wanted, an estate he wasn't prepared to manage, and a title that weighs more than he'll ever admit. He's been drowning since the funeral, and his solution has been to build walls around himself until nothing can reach him. I know, Coruscant said softly. Do you? Lady Isadora's gaze sharpened. Then know this as well. I didn't approve of this marriage. I thought it was sentimental nonsense on my brother's part, binding Theron to a disgraced family out of some ancient notion of honor. But my brother is dead, and the marriage exists, and pretending otherwise helps no one. She set down her teacup with a decisive click. The Sinclair ball is in 3 weeks. Theron must attend. You will attend with him. Not as a ghost, not as an invisible embarrassment, but as the Duchess of Renford. Whatever that requires. Coruscant's heart hammered against her ribs. His Grace has said nothing to me about His Grace will do as he's told, if properly motivated. A ghost of a smile crossed Lady Isadora's severe features. That's where you come in. I don't understand. You've spent 6 months making my nephew's tenants adore you. Now you'll spend 3 weeks making society accept you. Lady Isadora rose, signaling the interview was ending. I'll arrange for Madame Rochelle to attend you this afternoon. Your wardrobe is entirely inadequate. Coruscant stood as well, her mind reeling. Why are you doing this? You just said you didn't approve of the marriage. Lady Isadora paused at the door, looking back with an expression Coruscant couldn't decipher. Because yesterday, I watched my nephew ride into that village and see his wife for the first time. Not look at her. See her. And I saw something in his face that I haven't seen since his father died. She turned the door handle. You surprised him, Duchess. That's the first interesting thing to happen in this family in 6 months. What do you want from me? I want you to keep surprising him. Lady Isadora's voice dropped, losing some of its sharpness. And perhaps, if you're very clever and very lucky, surprise yourself in the process. She swept from the room before Coruscant could respond, leaving behind the scent of rosewater and the unsettling sensation that her entire world had just shifted beneath her feet. 3 weeks until the ball. 3 weeks to transform from ghost to duchess. And somewhere in the halls of Renford, a husband who had finally seen her and had no idea what to do about it. Madame Rochelle arrived with 3 assistants, 17 trunks of fabric samples, and an expression that suggested she had dressed queens and found them wanting. "Remove the gray," she commanded, before even greeting Coruscant properly. "Gray is for widows and governesses. You are neither." Coruscant found herself stripped of her simple morning dress and wrapped in a silk robe, while Madame Rochelle's assistants circled her like hawks assessing prey. Measurements were taken. Colors were held against her skin. Her hair was unpinned, examined, and pronounced salvageable with proper attention. "The bone structure is good," Madame Rochelle observed, tilting Coruscant's chin with cool fingers. "The complexion wants sun, but that can be managed. The posture—" She stepped back, frowning. "You carry yourself like someone expecting to be struck. I beg your pardon? Your shoulders, pulled in, protective." The modiste demonstrated, hunching slightly. "This says, 'Please don't notice me.' A duchess says, 'Notice me and tremble.' I'm not certain trembling is the effect I'm seeking." "Then you misunderstand your position." Madame Rochelle began sorting through fabric swatches with practiced efficiency. "You are not simply Theron Ashford's wife. You are the Duchess of Renford. That title has been held by women who commanded armies, advised kings, and shaped the fate of nations. When you enter a room, history enters with you." Coruscant had never thought of it that way. In her mind, the title had always belonged to someone else. The hypothetical wife Theron should have married. The polished society diamond who would have known instinctively how to navigate ballrooms and dinner parties. Not a scandal-marked nobody who had spent 6 months befriending farmers and mending schoolhouse roofs. "Emerald," Madame Rochelle announced, holding a swatch of deep green silk against Coruscant's cheek. "For the Sinclair ball. It will make your eyes unforgettable." "My eyes are brown." "Your eyes are amber in the right light. We will make certain the light is always right." The modiste smiled for the first time, a sharp expression that held no warmth but considerable satisfaction. "Lady Isadora has given me 3 weeks to transform you. I have performed greater miracles in less time." The hours that followed blurred into a fever dream of fabric and pins. Coruscant stood on a raised platform, while gowns took shape around her. Day dresses in soft blues and creams, dinner gowns in burgundy and gold, and the ball gown, emerging piece by piece, like something from a fairy tale she'd stopped believing in years ago. "You'll need jewelry," Madame Rochelle said during a brief pause for tea. "The family pieces, if the Duke permits." "I wouldn't know. I've never seen them." The modiste's eyebrows rose fractionally. "You've been married 6 months and haven't worn the Ashford jewels." "I haven't worn much of anything except what I brought with me." Coruscant heard the bitterness in her own voice and forced it down. "The circumstances of my marriage were unusual." "All marriages are unusual, Duchess. The trick is making them appear otherwise." By the time Madame Rochelle departed with promises to return daily until the ball, Coruscant felt as though she'd been turned inside out and reassembled according to someone else's specifications. Her rooms were strewn with fabric samples, fashion plates, and detailed notes about everything from the proper angle for holding a fan to the precise depth of curtsy required for various ranks. She collapsed into a chair by the window, watching the sun sink toward the distant hills. Somewhere out there, the Hartley baby was hopefully improving. Old Mr. Pemberton was probably wondering why she hadn't come to read to him. The village children were likely asking when their schoolhouse would reopen. Her real life carrying on without her. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Brinley entered with a small velvet box on a silver tray. From His Grace. Your Grace. The maid's eyes were wide with curiosity. A footman just brought it. Said the Duke wanted you to have it before dinner. Corisanda took the box with trembling fingers. She couldn't imagine what Theron might send her. A formal dismissal, perhaps, or instructions for the coming weeks. But when she opened the lid, her breath caught. Earrings. Delicate drops of amber surrounded by tiny diamonds, catching the fading light like captured fire. There was no note, no explanation, just the jewels themselves, nestled in cream silk, beautiful and utterly unexpected. "Oh," Brinley breathed, peering over her shoulder. "Those are lovely, Your Grace. They'll match your eyes perfectly." Corisande stared at the earrings, trying to reconcile this gift with the cold stranger who had barely spoken to her in 6 months. What did it mean? An apology? A peace offering? Or simply a practical measure? The Duchess of Renford required appropriate adornment, nothing more. She closed the box carefully, her heart racing with something she refused to name. She touched the velvet again before setting it aside, wondering what tomorrow would bring and whether she dared to hope. 3 weeks until the ball. And suddenly, everything felt terrifyingly possible. The transformation began in earnest the following morning. Lady Isadora appeared at breakfast with a schedule that made military campaigns look casual. Dancing lessons at 9, deportment training at 11, luncheon with selected society allies at 1, afternoon calls to be received at 3, evening dress rehearsals at 6. The goal, Lady Isadora explained, spreading marmalade on her toast with surgical precision, is to make you so polished that no one will dare question your presence. The Vance scandal will still follow you, but if you're impeccable in every other way, it becomes a footnote, rather than a headline. And if I'm not impeccable, then you'll be torn apart, and my nephew's reputation will suffer accordingly. Lady Isadora's tone was matter of fact. Society forgives many things, but it never forgives weakness. You must be above reproach. Theron was notably absent from these preparations. He took his meals early or late, avoiding the dining room when Corisanda was present. She caught glimpses of him occasionally, crossing the main hall, riding out toward the estate's far boundaries, conferring with Caius in low voices that fell silent when she approached. He was still avoiding her, even now. Still building walls. But he had sent the earrings. That had to mean something. The dancing master arrived on the 3rd day, a tall, severe man named Mr. Vittorio, who had reportedly trained half the noble families in England. He assessed Corisanda's abilities with a series of increasingly complicated exercises, then pronounced her adequate but uninspired. "You dance like someone following rules," he said, demonstrating a waltz turn with invisible grace. "You must dance like someone making them." "I don't understand." "Of course you don't. That's why you need me." He positioned her arms with impersonal efficiency. Again. And this time, stop apologizing with your body. The days blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and incremental progress. Corisande's feet ached from dancing. Her cheeks hurt from practicing smiles. Her brain overflowed with names, titles, family connections, and strategic conversational gambits that Lady Isadora insisted she memorize. "The Countess of Whitmore will likely approach you first," Lady Isadora said during one of their afternoon sessions. "She's a terrible gossip, but influential. Compliment her daughter's singing. The girl is dreadful, but the mother is blind to it. The Marchioness of Ashby will pretend not to see you. Let her. She's nursing a grudge against the family from 20 years ago. Lord Sinclair himself will be courteous because it's his party, and he has no choice. But his wife despises anyone prettier than her daughters, so tread carefully." This sounds less like a ball and more like a battlefield. Finally, you understand. Lady Isadora's approval was crisp. Society is always a battlefield. The weapons are simply more elegant. On the 7th day, everything changed. Corisanda was practicing a particularly difficult quadrille with Mr. Vittorio when the music room door opened and Theron walked in. He stopped just inside the threshold, his expression unreadable as he watched them move through the figures. Corisanda stumbled, her concentration shattered, and Mr. Vittorio sighed with theatrical disappointment. "Your Grace," the dancing master said, bowing slightly. "We were not expecting you." Clearly. Theron's gaze moved from the dancing master to Corisanda, lingering on her flushed face and disordered hair. "Leave us, Vittorio." "But Your Grace, we have not yet mastered." "I said, leave us." The dancing master departed with offended dignity, gathering his music sheets and casting reproachful glances over his shoulder. Corisande stood alone in the center of the room, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must appear, her simple practice dress damp with exertion. "You've been busy," Theron said, moving further into the room. "Your aunt has been thorough." "My aunt is many things. Thorough is perhaps the kindest description." He stopped near the piano, running one finger along its polished surface. "I've been hearing reports, from the staff, from Caius, even from the village." Corisande felt her spine stiffen. "Am I being surveilled, Your Grace?" "You're being observed. There's a difference." His jaw tightened. "You wore the earrings." She touched her ears reflexively. She had put them on this morning, almost without thinking, drawn to their warmth against her skin. They were a gift. It seemed rude to ignore them. They were my mother's. The words landed like stones in still water. Corisanda's hand dropped from her ear. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "There was no note. There didn't need to be." Theron turned to face her fully, and for the first time, she saw something crack in his carefully maintained facade. "She died when I was 12. A fever that took her in 3 days. Those earrings were her favorite. She wore them every day, claimed they brought her luck. Then I shouldn't. She would have wanted you to have them." The words seemed to cost him something. "She always said jewelry was meant to be worn, not locked in vaults. That beauty was wasted on the dead." Corisanda didn't know what to say. This was more than Theron had shared with her in their entire marriage, more than she'd thought him capable of sharing with anyone. "Why are you telling me this?" He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. "Because my aunt reminded me that I've been a poor husband. Because my tenants look at me now with disappointment, where there used to be respect. Because yesterday, a child in the village asked me when the kind lady was coming back, and I realized I didn't know who she meant until I saw your face in her description." He moved closer, close enough that Corisanda could see the exhaustion carved into his features. "I didn't want this marriage," he said. "I resented my father for arranging it, for binding me to a stranger when I was drowning in grief and responsibility. I told myself keeping you separate was protection. For you, for me, for everyone. But I was lying. To whom? To myself, mostly." His smile was bitter. "I was afraid that if I looked at you, really looked, I would have to acknowledge that you were real, that you were suffering, that I was the cause." Corisande felt tears prick at her eyes and forced them back. "You weren't the only one building walls." "No, but I built mine first." He reached out, almost touching her face, then pulled back as if burned. "The ball is in 2 weeks. My aunt tells me you're ready, or nearly so. Is she right?" "I don't know. I've never done anything like this before." "Neither have I." His laugh was quiet, self-deprecating. "Attended balls, yes. But escorted a wife? Presented her to society as my chosen partner? That's entirely new territory. We're both navigating blind then. So it seems. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them. Not warmth, not yet, but the possibility of warmth. Perhaps we might navigate together, if you're willing. Coruscant thought of the earrings against her skin, of the mother who had worn them with joy, of the son who had kept them locked away until now. I'm willing, she said. But I have a condition. His eyebrow rose. You're negotiating with me? I learned from the best. Your aunt is a formidable teacher. That earned her almost a smile. Name your condition. When this is over, when the ball is behind us, and society has rendered its verdict, I want the truth. About why you really married me. About what your father said. About what happens next. She held his gaze steadily. No more walls. No more hiding. If we're to be partners in this, I need to know what I'm partnering with. Theron studied her for a long moment, his expression shifting through emotions too complex to name. You ask a great deal. I've waited 6 months. I think I've earned it. The silence stretched between them, sharp and crystalline. Then, slowly, Theron extended his hand. Agreed, he said. After the ball, the truth. All of it. Coruscant took his hand, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers for the first time since their wedding day. She didn't know what the truth would reveal, but finally, she felt brave enough to find out. The second week of preparations brought unexpected changes. Theron began appearing at meals, not just occasionally, but consistently, taking his place at the head of the table, while Coruscant sat at the opposite end, and Lady Isadora presided over conversations from the middle. At first, the silence was painful, broken only by the clink of silverware and Lady Isadora's pointed observations about society gossip. But gradually, tentatively, words began to fill the gaps. The south pasture needs draining before winter, Theron said one evening, addressing no one in particular. Caius says the flooding last year cost us 3 calves. Mrs. Hartley mentioned the same concern, Coruscant replied, surprising herself. Her husband's fields border the pasture. They've been worried about the runoff. Theron looked at her. Really looked, the way he had in the music room. You know the Hartleys? I know most of your tenants, Your Grace, the ones in the lower village at least. Lady Isadora's fork paused midway to her mouth. And what else did the tenants say? About the estate's management? It was a trap, Coruscant knew. Anything she said could be used against her, evidence that she'd been meddling where she didn't belong. But Theron's expression held genuine curiosity, rather than accusation, so she answered honestly. They respect your family. Your father was well loved. They still speak of him with affection. But they worry that you're stretched too thin. The steward handles the daily concerns, but the tenants miss seeing their lord. They want to know you care. I do care. They need to see it. Theron was quiet for the remainder of the meal, but the next morning, Caius reported that the Duke had ordered a full inspection of the drainage situation to be conducted personally rather than delegated. Small victories, Coruscant thought, but victories nonetheless. The thaw continued in unexpected ways. She found books appearing in her sitting room, volumes of poetry and philosophy that she hadn't requested, but discovered she wanted to read. When she mentioned enjoying a particular type of biscuit at tea, the kitchen began producing them daily. Her favorite flowers appeared in vases throughout the East Wing, refreshed every morning without comment. She said nothing about these gifts, and Theron never claimed credit for them. But they both knew. On the 10th day, he found her in the library. Coruscant had discovered the vast room during her first week at Renford, but she'd been too intimidated to linger. Now, with Lady Isadora napping, and Mr. Vittorio dismissed for the day, she'd slipped inside to explore the towering shelves properly. You're reading Castellan. Theron's voice came from behind her, making her jump. Most people find him impenetrable. She clutched the book to her chest, heart racing. I didn't hear you come in. You were absorbed. He moved closer, examining the spine of her chosen volume. The architecture of memory. That's his most difficult work. I'm only partway through. Some of the arguments seem deliberately obscure. He believed that accessible writing was lazy writing, that readers should work to understand him. Theron reached past her to pull another book from the shelf. This might help. His earlier essays, where he develops the concepts more gradually. Their fingers brushed as he handed her the book. Neither of them pulled away immediately. You've read all of these? Corisanda asked, glancing at the thousands of volumes surrounding them. Most of them. My father believed in comprehensive education. I spent half my childhood in this room. His voice softened with memory. He would read aloud to me in the evenings. Poetry, mostly. Sometimes philosophy when I was older. He said books were the only friends that never disappointed you. That sounds lonely. It was. But also safe. Theron moved to one of the tall windows, his profile silhouetted against the afternoon light. After my mother died, I retreated here. Books couldn't leave me. Couldn't die unexpectedly. Couldn't. He stopped himself, jaw tightening. Couldn't hurt you, Corisande finished softly. Yes. She set down both books and approached him carefully, the way one might approach a wounded animal. Is that why you kept me away? Because letting me close meant risking another loss. Theron turned to face her, and she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke it. Partly. And partly because I didn't know how to be a husband. My father was devoted to my mother. Utterly, completely devoted. When she died, a piece of him went with her. He never recovered. Not really. He spent the rest of his life mourning what he'd lost. His voice dropped. I didn't want that. I told myself that if I never cared, I could never be broken. And instead, you broke yourself preemptively. The words were harsh, but true. Theron flinched as if struck. I've been cruel to you, he said quietly. Not through violence or anger, but through absence. Through treating you as if you didn't exist. That was unforgivable. Then don't ask for forgiveness. Ask for a second chance. His eyes searched her face. Would you give me one? After everything? Corisande thought of the months of loneliness, of crying herself to sleep in a beautiful room that felt like a prison. She thought of the anger she'd carried, the hurt she'd buried, the walls she'd built to match his own. But she also thought of the earrings, warm against her neck, the books appearing without comment, the flowers blooming in her rooms each morning. I already have, she said, the day I chose to leave my rooms and build a life in your village. That was my second chance, not for you, but for myself. I stopped waiting for you to see me and started seeing myself instead. And now you're finally looking. She met his gaze steadily. The question is whether you like what you see. Theron crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I like it, he said, his voice rough. More than I expected. More than I wanted to. You've turned my entire household upside down, made my tenants adore you more than they adore me, and somehow convinced my terrifying aunt that you're worth championing. And is that a problem? It should be. His hand rose, hovering near her cheek without quite making contact. I've spent 6 months pretending you weren't real. Now I can't stop thinking about you. Your laugh carries through the hallways, and I find myself stopping to listen. Your scent lingers in rooms after you've left. I see your handwriting on the household accounts. Yes, I know you've been helping Mrs. Fenwick, and I spend far too long staring at the loops of your letters. Corisande's breath caught. That sounds almost like... Don't say it. His voice was strained. Not yet. It's too soon. We've barely begun. But his hand finally made contact, brushing a strand of hair from her face with trembling gentleness. The touch sent fire racing down her spine. The ball is in 4 days, he said. After that, everything changes. Either society accepts you, or they don't. Either we find a way forward together, or we remain as we were, polite strangers sharing a name. Which outcome do you want? His fingers traced the line of her jaw, feather-light and devastating. I want to stop being afraid, he whispered. I want to stop choosing safety over feeling. I want to be the kind of man my father was, devoted, present, alive. And I think, he swallowed hard, I think you might be the one who shows me how. Before she could respond, the library door opened. Lady Isadora's voice cut through the charged air. There you are. Madame Rochelle has arrived for the final fitting. The ball gown requires adjustments. Theron stepped back, his face smoothing into its familiar mask. But his eyes remained fixed on Coruscant, burning with everything he'd left unsaid. We'll continue this later, he murmured, too quiet for his aunt to hear. Coruscant nodded, her heart pounding against her ribs. 4 days until the ball. 4 days until everything changed. And she found herself counting every hour. The Sinclair estate blazed with 1,000 candles, their light spilling from every window like liquid gold against the evening darkness. Carriages lined the curved drive, depositing lords and ladies in silks and jewels, while liveried footmen guided them toward the grand entrance. Coruscant sat frozen in the Ashford carriage, her gloved hands clenched in her lap. Breathe, Theron said quietly from the seat across from her. You're turning pale. I'm terrified. Good. Terror keeps you sharp. Lady Isadora adjusted her own gloves with practiced calm. Use it. Channel it into presence. The moment you step from this carriage, you become the Duchess of Renford. Nothing less will suffice. The door opened. A footman's hand appeared, waiting. Coruscant thought of 6 months alone in the East Wing. She thought of the villagers who had welcomed her when no one else would. She thought of Mrs. Hartley's gratitude, old Mr. Pemberton's smile, and the children who called her the kind lady. She was not nothing. She had never been nothing. She took the footman's hand and descended. The emerald gown cascaded around her like water, catching the light with every movement. Madame Rochelle had outdone herself. The bodice fitted perfectly, the neckline daring but not improper, the skirts sweeping in elegant folds that whispered against the gravel drive. Her mother's pearls, retrieved from storage and cleaned until they glowed, circled her throat. And at her ears, Theron's gift, the amber drops that had belonged to his mother, warm against her skin like a benediction. Theron appeared beside her, offering his arm. He wore evening black with devastating effect, his dark hair swept back and his blue eyes unreadable as they swept over her appearance. You look, he paused, seeming to search for words. You look like a duchess. Is that a compliment? It's a fact. His hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. Stay close to me. The first hour will be the worst. They climbed the marble steps together, Lady Isadora following like a general surveying conquered territory. The entrance hall swallowed them in warmth and noise, music drifting from the ballroom, conversations rising and falling in practiced rhythms, the rustle of silk and flash of diamonds everywhere Coruscant looked. And the stairs. Dear God, the stairs. Every eye in the vicinity turned toward them as they were announced. His Grace, the Duke of Renford. Her Grace, the Duchess of Renford. The Dowager Lady Isadora Ashford. Whispers erupted like fire through dry grass. Coruscant felt them crawling over her skin. The curiosity, the judgment, the delicious scandal of the hidden wife finally revealed. Steady, Theron murmured. Chin up. They're watching to see if you falter. She didn't falter. She walked beside her husband, with her head high and her smile fixed, navigating the sea of strangers with every ounce of training Lady Isadora had pounded into her. Names and faces blurred together. The Countess of Whitmore, whose daughter apparently did sing terribly. Lord Pemberton, ancient and distinguished, who bore no relation to the village Pemberton, but seemed equally kind. The Marquis of Ashby and his cold-eyed wife, who looked through Corisande exactly as Lady Isadora had predicted. "You're doing beautifully," Theron said during a brief pause near the refreshment tables. "Even my aunt looks impressed, and she's never impressed. I feel like I'm performing in a play where everyone else knows the script." "Welcome to society," his lips quirked. "The trick is to keep performing until the performance becomes real." The music shifted, signaling the first waltz. Theron turned to her, extending his hand with formal precision. "Dance with me." It was not a request, but when Corisande placed her hand in his, she found she didn't want to refuse. They took the floor together, and the whispers rose to a crescendo. She could feel hundreds of eyes tracking their movements, cataloging every gesture, every glance, and every breath of space between their bodies. The pressure was suffocating. "Look at me," Theron commanded softly. "Only at me. The rest don't exist." She met his eyes and found them burning with something she couldn't name. "Mr. Vittorio would be proud," he said, as they moved through the first turn. "You're not apologizing with your body anymore." "I'm too terrified to apologize." "Good. Terror suits you." His hand pressed more firmly against her waist. "You're the most beautiful woman in this room, and half of them are choking on their jealousy." "Flattery won't make me less frightened." "It's not flattery. It's truth." He pulled her slightly closer than propriety allowed. "I spent 6 months trying not to see you. Now I can't look away." The confession stole her breath more effectively than any physical exertion. Before she could respond, the waltz ended, leaving them standing together in the center of the floor, while applause scattered around them. "Well," a new voice purred, cutting through the moment. "Isn't this touching?" Corisande turned to find a woman approaching. Tall, blonde, exquisitely dressed in silver silk that made her look like a winter goddess. Her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Lady Venetia," Theron said, his voice cooling several degrees. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Didn't you? After all those letters I sent, begging you to reconsider your hasty marriage?" Lady Venetia's gaze swept over Corisande with deliberate insolence. "Though I suppose I understand now. The Vance girl is prettier than I expected, considering her family's circumstances." The words landed like blows. Corisande felt the attention of nearby guests sharpening, scenting blood. "Lady Venetia and I were acquainted before my father's death," Theron said quietly, positioning himself slightly between Corisande and the approaching threat. "There was an informal understanding that my father's illness rendered moot." "Moot!" Lady Venetia's laugh was crystalline and cruel. "Such a polite way of saying you abandoned me for a disgraced nobody whose father fled the country with his mistress and left his family to starve." The ballroom had gone very quiet. Corisande could feel the scandal spreading outward, like ripples in poisoned water. "My father's sins are not mine," she heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. "And I was never starving. But thank you for your concern, Lady Venetia. It's touching that you care so deeply about the circumstances of strangers." Something flickered in Lady Venetia's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or grudging respect. "She has claws," the woman observed, turning to Theron. "How delightful. You always did prefer challenges to conveniences." Her smile sharpened further. "But claws won't protect her when the rest of society learns what I know. About her mother's debts, about her brother's gambling, about every desperate measure the Vance family took to survive before you swooped in with your convenient rescue. You will say nothing, Theron said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Whatever grievances you harbor against me, they do not justify attacking an innocent woman. Innocent? Lady Venetia's laugh rang out. Oh, Theron, no one in this room is innocent. Least of all you. She swept away before either of them could respond, leaving devastation in her wake. The whispers resumed immediately, louder and more vicious than before. Coruscant saw heads bent together, fans fluttering, eyes sliding toward her with renewed speculation. We should leave, she whispered. No. Theron's grip on her arm tightened. If we leave now, she wins. We stay. We dance. We smile. We prove she cannot touch us. Can't she? His jaw clenched. Not if we don't let her. But as they rejoined the crowd, Coruscant couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had just been set in motion, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. They stayed until midnight, performing normalcy with exhausting determination. Coruscant danced with every lord who asked, made conversation with every lady who approached, smiled until her face ached, and her feet screamed for relief. Lady Isadora remained nearby like a watchful guardian, deflecting the worst of the gossip with surgical precision. But Lady Venetia's words had done their damage. Coruscant could feel it in the changed quality of the stares, the edge beneath polite questions, the way certain guests suddenly became unavailable for introduction. The Marchioness of Hertford left early, Lady Isadora reported grimly during a brief respite. She was supposed to sponsor your presentation at Lady Ashworth's garden party next week. I suspect that invitation will be quietly withdrawn. Because of what Lady Venetia said? Because society loves scandal more than it loves justice. Lady Isadora's expression hardened. Venetia Marchwood is a viper, but she's a connected viper. Her father controls half the influential salons in London. If she's decided to destroy you, she has the resources to try. Theron appeared at Coruscant's elbow, his face grim. The carriage is ready. We've stayed long enough. The ride home was silent. Lady Isadora stared out the window with an expression of calculation. Theron sat rigid in his seat, emanating barely controlled fury. Coruscant studied her gloved hands and tried not to cry. She was supposed to marry you, she said finally, breaking the silence. Lady Venetia. Nothing was ever formalized. Theron's voice was clipped. Our families discussed a potential match. My father fell ill before any agreement could be reached. I chose to honor his dying wish instead. His dying wish to marry me to someone who didn't want me. I didn't know you. How could I want you? The words came out harsh, then softened. I didn't know anything except that I was losing my father and being forced into decisions I wasn't ready to make. Venetia represented continuity, expectation, the path I'd always assumed I would follow, and then suddenly everything changed. So, I'm the change you didn't choose. You're the change I'm choosing now. Theron leaned forward, capturing her hands in his. Whatever Venetia threatens, whatever she reveals, it doesn't alter what I've learned these past weeks. You are not your father's mistakes. You are not your family's scandals. You are Coruscant Ashford, Duchess of Renford, and I will not let anyone take that from you. The carriage arrived at Renford Hall before Coruscant could respond. They descended in silence, the tension between them crackling like lightning before a storm. Lady Isadora retired immediately, pleading exhaustion. The servants melted away with practiced discretion. And suddenly, Coruscant found herself alone with her husband in the shadowed entrance hall, the only light coming from scattered candles that painted everything in shades of gold and darkness. I should go to bed, she said, though she made no move toward the stairs. You should. Theron didn't move either. But I don't want you to. What do you want? He closed the distance between them in 3 strides, cupping her face in his hands with devastating tenderness. I want to stop pretending, he said hoarsely. I want to stop performing. I want one moment, just one, where we're not Duke and Duchess, not scandal and salvation, not anything except 2 people who are terrified and hopeful and achingly uncertain about everything. Theron, tell me to stop, and I will. Tell me this is too fast, too dangerous, too soon after everything we've been through. Tell me anything, and I'll listen. But don't ask me to pretend I don't feel this anymore, because I can't. I'm done hiding from you, Coruscant. I'm done hiding from myself. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, feather-light and reverent. His eyes searched hers with desperate intensity. What do you feel? She whispered. Everything. Nothing. I don't know how to name it. His forehead dropped against hers. When Lady Venetia attacked you tonight, I wanted to destroy her. Not because you're my wife and my honor demanded it. Because you were hurt, and I couldn't bear it. Because the thought of anyone causing you pain makes me want to raze entire cities. That seems excessive. It is. His laugh was broken. But it's true. You've become necessary to me somehow, without my permission, without my understanding. I spent 6 months trying to make you invisible, and instead, you became the only thing I see. Coruscant reached up, tracing the sharp line of his jaw with trembling fingers. I see you too, she said softly. The grief you carry, the fear you hide. The man beneath the title who's so afraid of loving that he forgot how to live. I see all of it, Theron, and I'm not running. You should. I'm broken in ways that might never heal. Then we'll be broken together. She rose on her toes, closing the impossible distance between them. That's what marriage is supposed to mean. Not perfection, not performance. Just 2 imperfect people choosing each other anyway. Coruscant, kiss me. The words came out steadier than she felt. Stop thinking about scandal and expectation and everything that should keep us apart. Just kiss me like you mean it. He didn't hesitate. His mouth found hers with hunger he'd been suppressing for weeks, or perhaps years, perhaps his entire carefully controlled life. The kiss was nothing like the chaste contact at their wedding. This was consuming, devastating, and a claiming that left no room for pretense. Coruscant melted against him, her hands fisting in his lapels, her body arching into his warmth. She tasted champagne and desperation, felt his hands slide into her carefully arranged hair and destroy Madame Rochelle's artistry without apology. When they finally broke apart, gasping, his eyes were wild. Tell me to stop, he said raggedly. Never. He kissed her again, deeper this time, backing her against the wall of the entrance hall, with an urgency that made her dizzy. Her pearl necklace pressed cold against her heated skin. The amber earrings swung with every movement. We should, she managed between kisses. Not here, he agreed, pulling back with visible effort. Not like this. Not when you deserve candlelight and softness and all the romance I never gave you. I don't need romance. I need you. You have me. His voice cracked on the words. You've had me for weeks. I was just too much of a coward to admit it. They stood wrapped together in the shadowed hall, hearts pounding in unified rhythm. Tomorrow, Theron said finally. Tomorrow, we face whatever Venetia throws at us. Tomorrow we decide what comes next. But tonight, we stop being afraid. Yes, he kissed her forehead, her eyelids, and the corner of her mouth. Tonight, we begin. The scandal broke 3 days later. Coruscant was taking breakfast alone. Theron had risen early for estate business. Lady Isadora was indisposed. When Mrs. Fenwick entered, with an expression that promised nothing good. Your Grace, there's been a development. She held out a newspaper, already folded to the relevant page. Corisande took it with numb fingers, already knowing she wouldn't like what she found. The headline screamed, "The Duke's Desperate Bride. Scandal, debt, and deception." In the Ashford marriage, the article was devastatingly thorough. It chronicled her father's ruin in excruciating detail. The gambling debts, the failed investments, the flight to the continent with his mistress. It described her mother's humiliation, her brother's continuing failures, the family's slide from respectability into disgrace. But worse, far worse, was the insinuation that Corisande had deliberately entrapped the grieving Duke. Sources close to the family suggest that Miss Vance pursued his grace with calculated determination, exploiting his vulnerable state following his father's death. The late Duke's deathbed arrangement has raised questions about undue influence and potential manipulation. The newspaper crumpled in Corisande's hands. "There's more, Your Grace." Mrs. Fenwick's voice was gentle. "Lady Isadora received a letter this morning. 3 of the families who had planned to call on you this week have sent regrets. And the garden party invitation has been withdrawn. Yes, I expected that." "What shall I tell His Grace?" Corisande set down the ruined newspaper and rose with mechanical precision. "Tell him nothing. I'll speak to him myself." But Theron found her first. He burst into her sitting room without knocking, the same newspaper clenched in his fist, his face twisted with fury. "Venetia." He spat the name like poison. "She fed them every detail. She's been planning this since the ball. It doesn't matter who. Of course it matters. She's destroyed your reputation out of spite, out of petty, vindictive spite, because I chose you over her. You didn't choose me. Your father chose me. That's what the article says, and that's what everyone believes." Corisande heard the flatness in her own voice and couldn't summon the energy to change it. "I'm the desperate nobody who trapped you into marriage through manipulation and timing. That's a lie. Is it?" She turned to face him, feeling something crack inside her chest. "You didn't want to marry me. You said so yourself. Your father arranged everything while you were drowning in grief, and I accepted because I had no other options. The facts aren't lies, Theron. Only the interpretation is wrong." "Then we correct the interpretation. We fight back. We—" "How?" The word exploded out of her. "How do we fight this? Lady Venetia has connections, resources, allies. We have a 6-month-old marriage that most of society doesn't even know existed until last week. Every fact she's presented is technically true. My father did abandon us. My mother did take in mending to survive. I did marry you to escape poverty. Those aren't lies we can refute. They're not the whole truth either. Since when does society care about the whole truth?" Corisande sank into a chair, her strength finally failing. "They care about entertainment, about scandal, about watching people fall so they can feel better about their own miserable lives. And I've given them everything they wanted." Theron knelt before her, capturing her hands in his. His eyes were fierce, desperate. "Listen to me. I don't care what society thinks. I don't care what Venetia says. The only opinion that matters is mine, and I know who you are." "Do you?" "We've known each other for 6 months, Theron. We've actually spoken for less than 3 weeks. You know the version of me that appeared after I stopped hiding. You don't know the scared, angry, desperate girl I was before. Then show me. Show me all of it. I'm not afraid. You should be." Tears spilled down her cheeks despite her efforts to contain them. "Because that girl is still inside me, and she's screaming that this was always going to happen. That I was foolish to hope. That no amount of dancing lessons or beautiful gowns could change who I fundamentally am. And who are you? Nobody." The word came out broken. "I'm nobody, Theron, a disgraced gentleman's daughter pretending to be a duchess. A charity case your father imposed on you out of misplaced guilt. I was never meant for this world, and everyone knows it now. Theron's grip on her hands tightened painfully. Stop. His voice was rough. Stop saying these things. They're not true. They feel true. They've always felt true. I just managed to forget for a little while. Because I made you forget. Yes. More tears fell. You made me believe I could belong here, that I could be more than my father's failures, that someone like you could actually... She stopped herself, choking on the words. Could actually what? Love someone like me. The confession tore from her throat like broken glass. I started to believe you might actually love me, Theron, and now the whole world is laughing at how stupid I was to hope. Silence fell between them, heavy and devastating. Theron released her hands and stood abruptly, his face pale. I need to think, he said. I need to. There must be something we can do. Legal action, perhaps. Or a public statement. You should distance yourself from me. Corisanda's voice sounded distant to her own ears. Issue a statement expressing regret for the hasty marriage. Have your solicitor draft separation papers. Society will forgive you if you act quickly enough. You can't possibly think I would. I think you should. She stood, moving toward the window, so she wouldn't have to see his face. I think it's the only sensible course. Your title, your family's reputation, everything you've worked to maintain. It's all at risk because of me, because of my father's sins, and my family's disgrace, and my own foolish hope that I could escape my past. Corisande, please go, her voice cracked. Please, just go. Let me think. Let me figure out what to do. She heard him behind her, felt his hesitation, his warring impulses. Then footsteps, retreating. The door opening and closing. She was alone. Corisande stood at the window for a long time, watching the estate grounds blur through her tears. The gardens she'd never walked, the stables she'd never visited, the village where people had loved her before they knew who she really was. Tomorrow, those villagers would read the same newspaper. Tomorrow, they would learn about her father's mistress and her mother's mending and every humiliating detail Lady Venetia had chosen to expose. Tomorrow, even the kind lady would be a scandal. She didn't remember deciding to leave. But somehow, an hour later, she found herself standing in her rooms, a small bag packed with essentials, a letter to Theron written and sealed on her writing desk. I'm sorry, the letter said. I was selfish to stay as long as I did. I release you from any obligation. Please don't follow me. The servants' corridor was empty at this hour, the back entrance unguarded. Within minutes, Corisande was outside, walking toward the village road with nothing but her bag and her shame. She didn't look back. If she had, she might have seen the figure watching from an upper window. Might have seen Theron's face, devastated and desperate, as he realized too late what she intended, but she didn't look back. And by the time he reached her rooms, she was already gone. The coaching inn was modest, but clean, tucked along the main road between Renford and the nearest market town. Corisande had walked 3 miles to reach it, her fine boots ruined beyond repair, her traveling cloak inadequate against the autumn chill. Just one night, she told the innkeeper, counting out coins she'd saved from her household allowance. I'll need passage on the morning coach to London. London, where her mother's cousin maintained a cramped boarding house in an unfashionable district. It wasn't much, but it was somewhere to go, somewhere to hide until the scandal died, and she could reinvent herself as someone new. The room she was given was small and sparse, a narrow bed, a washstand, a single candle guttering on the windowsill. Corisande sat on the edge of the mattress and let herself break completely. The tears came in great racking sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for the life she'd built in the village, destroyed by a vindictive woman's spite. She cried for the husband who'd finally started to see her, only for everything to shatter before they could truly begin. She cried for the girl who dared to hope and the woman who'd learned better. Hours passed. The candle burned low. Coruscant lay in the darkness, empty and exhausted, waiting for the morning coach that would carry her away from everything. The pounding on her door came just after midnight. "Coruscant!" Theron's voice, raw and desperate. "I know you're in there. The innkeeper told me. Open this door, or I swear to God, I'll break it down." She didn't move. "Coruscant, please!" His voice cracked on her name. "Please don't shut me out. Not now. Not after everything. Go home, Theron." Her voice emerged hoarse from crying. "There's nothing left to say." "There's everything left to say. Everything I should have said months ago. Everything I was too much of a coward to admit until I walked into your rooms and found you gone." The door handle rattled. Wood creaked under pressure. "I read your letter," he continued through the barrier between them. "You released me from obligation. But you can't release me from this, from what I feel. That's not something you get to decide alone. What you feel is temporary. It'll fade once the scandal settles. What I feel is permanent. It's carved into my bones. It's the reason I rode 3 miles in the dark, half mad with terror that I'd lost you completely." His voice dropped to something barely audible. "It's love, Coruscant. I love you, and I'm not letting you run away from that." The words hit her like physical blows. She pressed her hands against her eyes, trying to stop the fresh tears. "You don't mean that." "I've never meant anything more in my entire life." Another rattling of the handle. "Let me in. Let me say this to your face. Let me prove it." She rose slowly, crossing to the door on trembling legs. Her hand hovered over the latch for a long moment. Then she opened it. Theron stood in the narrow hallway, disheveled and wild-eyed. His hair was uncombed. His coat was askew. He looked like a man who'd been through a war. "You're here," he breathed, as if he hadn't quite believed it until now. "You found me. I'll always find you." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, never breaking eye contact. "You can run to London. You can run to the continent. You can run to the ends of the earth, and I will follow. That's what love means. That's what I should have understood from the beginning. Theron, let me finish." He took her hands, holding them like something precious. "I've spent my whole life afraid of loss, afraid of feeling, afraid of caring about anything or anyone who might be taken from me. And when my father arranged our marriage, I saw you as another threat, another person who could hurt me if I let you close. So I built walls. I kept you invisible. I told myself it was protection, when really it was cowardice. You had reasons, I had excuses." His grip tightened. "But these past weeks, watching you become the heart of my estate, seeing the way my tenants look at you, learning who you really are beneath the circumstances that brought you here, those excuses started crumbling. And when I kissed you in the entrance hall, they collapsed entirely." He raised her hands to his lips, pressing desperate kisses against her knuckles. "I love you," he said again, the words reverent and raw. "Not despite your past, because of it. Because you survived things that would have broken lesser people. Because you took a cage I built and turned it into a kingdom. Because you showed me what courage looks like when I'd forgotten how to be brave." Coruscant was crying again, but these tears felt different. Cleaner somehow. The scandal will pass. Scandals always do. And even if it doesn't, even if we spend the rest of our lives being whispered about and excluded, I don't care, as long as we spend them together. Your reputation means nothing without you." He cupped her face in his hands, wiping tears with his thumbs. "I spent 6 months protecting a reputation while destroying my marriage. I won't make that mistake again. Lady Venetia is going to learn what happens when you attack someone I love." His expression hardened momentarily. "My solicitors are already preparing a response. We have allies she doesn't know about. The Countess of Whitmore, surprisingly. She despises Venetia even more than she despises scandal, and my aunt has connections Venetia can only dream of. I don't want you fighting battles for me. Then fight them with me." He pressed his forehead against hers. "That's what I'm asking, Corisande. Not to rescue you. You don't need rescuing. Just to stand beside you. To face whatever comes together. To be the husband I should have been from the beginning." She closed her eyes, feeling his breath warm against her skin. "I'm scared. So am I." His voice was tender. "But I'm more scared of losing you than of anything society could do to us. What if it doesn't work? What if everything falls apart? Then we fall apart together, and we rebuild together. That's marriage. That's love. That's what my father understood when he arranged this match. Not that you needed saving, but that I did. You're my salvation, Corisande. You always were." She opened her eyes to find his burning with sincerity and fear and desperate hope. "I love you," she whispered. "I've been trying so hard not to, but I do." "Then come home with me." He kissed her softly, reverently. "Come home, and let me spend the rest of my life proving I deserve you." She answered him with a kiss of her own, fierce and tearful and full of everything she'd been too afraid to feel. "Yes," she said against his lips, "take me home." They returned to Renford Hall at dawn, both exhausted, but somehow lighter. Lady Isadora was waiting in the entrance hall, her expression impossible to read. She surveyed them slowly, Corisande's ruined boots, Theron's disheveled appearance, the way their hands remained clasped between them. "So," she said finally, "you found her." "I found her." "And she agreed to return?" "She agreed to stay." Theron's voice was firm. "Permanently. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Lady Isadora's gaze shifted to Corisande. "Is this true?" "Yes, your ladyship." "Even knowing what society is saying? Even knowing what they'll continue to say?" "I stopped caring about society's opinion when I realized my husband's was the only one that mattered." Corisande felt Theron's hand tighten around hers, and his opinion seems favorable. Something shifted in Lady Isadora's severe features. Not quite softening, but something close. "Sit down," she commanded, gesturing toward the nearby drawing room. "Both of you. We have matters to discuss." They sat together on the settee, still holding hands. Lady Isadora took the chair across from them, her posture rigid, but her expression thoughtful. "I've been busy while you were chasing your wife across the countryside," she said to Theron. "Letters were sent. Favors were called. The Countess of Whitmore and I have a long history. She owes me several debts, and I've decided to collect." "What kind of debts?" Corisande asked. "The kind that matter." Lady Isadora's smile was thin. "By tomorrow morning, a counter-narrative will begin circulating. One that emphasizes your devotion to the tenants, your tireless work on behalf of the estate, and the tragic circumstances that forced a good woman into a difficult marriage. That's manipulation. That's society." Lady Isadora waved a dismissive hand. "You're not lying. Everything being said is true. We're simply ensuring it's said loudly enough to drown out Lady Venetia's poison." "And Venetia herself?" Theron asked. "We'll find that her invitations are suddenly less forthcoming. Her father's influence has limits, and he's not inclined to spend political capital defending his daughter's vendetta against a duke." Lady Isadora's expression sharpened. "I've also had a very productive conversation with her mother. It seems Lady Venetia neglected to mention certain details of her past. Details the Marchioness would prefer remained private." Corisande felt a chill. "You're blackmailing her." "I'm providing incentive for discretion." Lady Isadora's tone was pleasant, but her eyes were steel. There's a difference. By week's end, Lady Venetia will discover that pursuing this scandal further carries costs she's unwilling to pay. I don't want to win through threats and manipulation. Then you'll lose. Lady Isadora leaned forward, her gaze intense. Listen to me, Duchess. Society is not a meritocracy. The good do not triumph simply by being good. If you want to survive, you must be willing to fight with the weapons available. That doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a realistic one. Theron spoke before Corisanda could respond. She's right. I wish she weren't, but she is. Venetia chose to attack you with gossip and manipulation. We can choose to respond in kind, or we can watch while she destroys everything you've built. What I built was real, Corisande said quietly. The relationships with the tenants, the work in the village, none of that was manipulation. And none of it will disappear. Lady Isadora's voice gentled slightly. In fact, it's your greatest advantage. The people who know you, actually know you, will speak on your behalf. Mrs. Fenwick has already rallied the household staff. Caius has sent word to the tenant families. Even old Mr. Pemberton dictated a letter describing your kindness. She paused. Real connections trump fabricated scandal, given enough time. And in the meantime, we weather the storm. Lady Isadora rose, signaling the conversation was ending. There's a gathering at Ashford Manor next month. My home, not this one. I'm inviting every family that matters. They'll come because I ask. And while they're there, they'll meet the real Duchess of Renford. Not the caricature in the newspapers. The real woman. You'd do that for me? I'm doing it for my nephew. Lady Isadora's gaze moved to Theron, something complicated passing between them. He spent 6 months half alive. These past weeks I've watched him return to himself. If you're the cause of that resurrection, then you're family, and I protect my family. She swept from the room without waiting for a response, leaving Corisande and Theron alone. She terrifies me, Corisande admitted. She terrifies everyone. Theron pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. But she's on your side now. That matters more than you know. Is it over? The worst of it? Probably not. His honesty was gentle. There will be whispers for months. Some doors will remain closed. But the worst is behind us, I think. And whatever comes next, we face it together. Together. He kissed her properly then, slow and sweet. I liked the sound of that. The gathering at Ashford Manor took place on a crisp October afternoon, the grounds ablaze with autumn color. Corisanda descended the main staircase in a gown of deep burgundy velvet, her hair arranged simply, and her mother's pearls at her throat. No elaborate styling, no excessive adornment. Lady Isadora had insisted that authenticity was her greatest weapon. Let them see who you really are, she had commanded. That's worth more than any costume. The guests had been arriving for an hour, carriages depositing lords and ladies in the curved drive. But unlike the Sinclair ball, these faces were curious rather than hostile, drawn by Lady Isadora's formidable reputation and the whispered promise of witnessing something significant. Theron waited at the base of the stairs, watching her descend with an expression that made her breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said, taking her hand. "You look nervous." "I am nervous." He lifted her hand to his lips. "But not about you. About whether I deserve to stand beside you." Before she could respond, Lady Isadora appeared, resplendent in silver silk. "It's time. Everyone is gathered in the great hall. Theron, you know what to do." He nodded, offering Corisanda his arm. Together, they walked toward the murmur of voices. The great hall fell silent as they entered. Perhaps 50 guests watched from clusters around the room. the cream of local society, supplemented by several notable London families. Coruscant recognized some faces from the Sinclair ball, though their expressions were notably less hostile. Theron led her to the center of the room, then turned to address the assembled guests. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice carrying with practiced ease. "I know there's been considerable speculation about my marriage these past weeks, some of it accurate, much of it deliberately misleading." A ripple of interest passed through the crowd. "I'm not here to defend my wife against lies. She needs no defense. Instead, I want to tell you what I've learned over the past 6 months, about duty, about love, and about the difference between the two." He turned to face Coruscant, taking both her hands in his. "I married this woman without knowing her. I kept her hidden away, convinced I was protecting us both from scandal. I was wrong about everything. While I hid in my study, nursing grief and resentment, she built relationships with every family on my estate. She nursed the sick. She educated the children. She earned more love in 6 months than I had in a lifetime." His voice roughened with emotion. "When I finally saw her, truly saw her, I realized my father hadn't burdened me with an obligation. He'd given me a gift, the greatest gift of my life." He released one of her hands, reaching into his pocket. "I'm not asking you to forget her family's history. I'm asking you to see her clearly, as I finally learned to see her. As the woman who transformed my household. As the Duchess who earned that title through deeds, not birth. As my wife, whom I love more than I ever thought possible." He withdrew a ring, not the simple band she'd worn since their wedding, but something new, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, catching the afternoon light like captured stars. "I gave you a loveless wedding," he said, his voice quiet now, meant for her alone, though everyone listened. "Let me give you a true declaration instead." He dropped to one knee before the assembled guests, gasps rippling through the room. "Coruscant Ashford, Duchess of Renford, keeper of my heart, will you do me the honor of remaining my wife? Not out of obligation or desperation, but because I love you and you love me, and together we can build something worth protecting?" Tears streamed down Coruscant's face, and she didn't care who saw. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger beside the original band, then rose and kissed her before everyone. The applause began slowly, then swelled. Genuine, not polite. Coruscant saw Lady Isadora nodding with satisfaction. She saw faces that had been hostile at the Sinclair ball now softened with something like admiration. She saw, through the crowd, several familiar figures from the village: Mrs. Fenwick, Caius, even old Mr. Pemberton in a wheeled chair, watching with proud, tear-bright eyes. "Well done," Theron murmured against her hair. "We did it together. Together." He pulled back, smiling at her with an openness she'd never seen before. "I rather like that word." 6 months later, the gardens of Renford Hall bloomed with spring flowers as Coruscant walked the paths she'd once been forbidden to enjoy. Behind her, the great house glowed in the afternoon sunlight, no longer a prison, but a home. "You're smiling." She turned to find Theron approaching, having just returned from the village. In his hands, he carried a bundle of wildflowers, clearly picked from the fields rather than purchased. "I'm happy," she said simply. "Is that so surprising?" "Not anymore." He handed her the flowers, then drew her close. "The Hartley baby is walking now, by the way. Mrs. Hartley wanted me to tell you. She could have told me herself when I visited yesterday. She wanted me to know that I know." He laughed softly. "The village has decided I need reminding that my wife is beloved. As if I could ever forget." They walked together through the gardens, hand in hand, pausing at the bench, where she'd first realized she loved him. So much had changed since those desperate early months. The scandal had faded, as Lady Isadora predicted. Lady Venetia had retreated to the continent, pursuing a new marriage with a minor Italian count. Society had moved on to fresher gossip, but some things endured. "I found something," Theron said, reaching into his coat. "In my father's papers. A letter he never sent." He handed her a folded page, yellowed with age. Corisande opened it carefully. "My dear son," the letter began. "If you're reading this, I am already gone, and you are likely furious with me for the marriage I've arranged. I beg you to forgive an old man's interference. I met Corisande Vance only once, when she was 12 years old, and her father brought her to visit. She was shy, serious, and utterly unaware of her own worth. She spent the afternoon reading in my library, and thanked me with such genuine warmth that I never forgot her. Years later, when I learned of her family's downfall, I saw an opportunity, not to rescue her, but to rescue you. You've always been too controlled, too cautious, too afraid to risk your heart. I worried you would spend your life in emotional safety and never truly live. She will challenge you, I think. She will make you feel things you'd rather avoid. That's precisely what you need. Love requires courage, son. I hope she teaches you to be brave." Your loving father Corisande's vision blurred with tears. "He knew," she whispered, "even then. He knew everything." Theron's voice was thick. "He saw what I couldn't, that you were exactly what I needed." She pressed the letter to her heart, looking up at the man who had become her entire world. "I would have waited," she said softly. "However long it took, I would have waited for you to see me. You shouldn't have had to." He cupped her face, his eyes holding hers. "But I'm grateful every day that you did." He kissed her there in the spring sunlight, surrounded by flowers and promise, and a future neither of them had dared to imagine. And somewhere, perhaps, an old duke smiled. "Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that chooses courage over convenience, in characters who fight for happiness despite the odds, in endings that feel earned and true. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming, and I'm grateful for every moment you spend with these characters. Do you have a favorite line or scene? Your engagement helps me understand what moves you, what keeps you listening, and what kinds of stories to create next. Consider subscribing if you'd like more romances with emotional depth and genuine character growth. Thank you for being here. You make this community what it is.